Now, my first guest, who I can look at him
Me too.
and for some reason get the giggles. As you know, he's an Emmy Award-winning performer. On Tuesday night, May 25th, he's hosting a special along with you.
For 30 years, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television. Night after night, The Tonight Show wasn't just America's bedtime ritual. It was the place where legends were made. Stars lined up by the thousands, each hoping to win a smile, a laugh, or even just a nod of approval from the man behind the desk. But Johnny, he wasn't impressed easily. He could be warm, he could be witty, but he was also famously hard to crack. And yet there were a rare few who broke through. Not the biggest names or the flashiest scandals, but the ones who touched something deeper in Carson himself. A private list he never shared on air. 9 guests who weren't just famous. They were unforgettable. They made him laugh when nobody else could, reminded him of why he chose this life, and even caught him off guard in ways that television history would never forget. Tonight, we're opening that list. From the queen of comedy who hijacked his interviews, to the crooner who turned barroom banter into magic, to the movie star who made Johnny Carson cry on live television. These were the golden age icons Johnny truly loved. And once you hear why, you'll never see them the same again. When Lucille Ball stepped through the curtain, the room shifted. Johnny's shoulders loosened, his eyes brightened, and even the band seemed to sit a little taller. She didn't arrive like a guest hoping to impress a host. She entered like a storm that everyone had secretly been waiting for. The laugh was unmistakable, full-bodied, generous, and just a little dangerous, because once Lucy started, the plan was gone. Carson loved plans. He loved control. But with Lucy, he loved losing it. In commercial breaks, she'd turn the stage into a playground, mock balancing on cable runs, mugging at the cue card guy, or pantomiming a pratfall so crisp the boom operator nearly dropped his pole. The cameras might stop. Lucy didn't. She believed in a simple rule. If there's a heartbeat in the room, there's a show to be done. Johnny admired that. It reminded him of the early days, when the laugh mattered more than the format. On air, she could pivot from a story about a disastrous rehearsal to a physical bit so fast Johnny's next question would evaporate on his tongue. He didn't mind. Watching Lucy meant witnessing the kind of live-wire comedy that television rarely caught, dangerous enough to feel real, warm enough to feel safe. She had impeccable timing, but she also had instinct. If a joke needed space, she let the silence work. If a moment needed noise, she brought the thunder. What sealed her place in Johnny's private circle wasn't only her talent, it was her care. After taping, Lucy lingered. She learned names. She thanked the lighting crew for making a redhead look human. She told the stage manager he ran a tighter ship than any director she'd ever had. She signed napkins for interns and encouraged a nervous researcher to try stand-up just once. Johnny saw all of it. He respected it more than he said. With Lucy, the interviews felt like jazz. Johnny would lay down a rhythm, and she'd riff until the walls shook. He didn't try to outplay her. He comped. He smiled. He let the solo sing. When the applause rolled like surf across Studio One, he'd glance at the audience with a boyish grin that said, "This is why I do this." Lucille Ball didn't just make Johnny laugh. She made him free. And when she left the set, hair blazing, mischief still crackling in the air, Carson would settle behind the desk, exhale, and quietly savor the rarest feeling in television. Joy that didn't need any editing. When Bob Hope visited, Johnny didn't prepare questions so much as opening jabs. He knew what was coming. A precise counterpunch, a tag, then another tag, until the audience was laughing too hard to breathe. Hope's one-liners felt carved, not written. He'd wait a beat, tilt his head, and drop the line with the confidence of a man who'd tested it in 100 rooms and never missed. Carson loved that kind of economy. No wasted words, no drift. Hope would sit, cross a leg, and the two of them would spar like old pros who respected the rules and knew the shortcuts. Johnny would set a clean tee, politics, golf, Hollywood, then watch Hope drive it to the back wall. The trick wasn't surprise, it was craft. Hope didn't reach for jokes. He pulled them from a well he'd been filling for decades. The rhythm was the show. Before taping, the vibe was lighter. Hope liked to arrive early and swap golf stories, the kind that turned into bits once the cameras rolled. Johnny appreciated being treated like a peer, not just a gateway to an audience. That mattered to him. A lot of guests came for the spotlight. Hope showed up for the game. On air, the chemistry snapped into place. Johnny would throw a setup. "How's the tour?" And Hope would answer with a glide path to a punchline, then spin off into a tag about airport food, then pivot to a zinger about his own act. Johnny's eyes would flash that grateful, mischievous look that said, "There it is." He didn't need to top it. He just needed to feed the next pitch. Hope's humor wasn't mean, and it wasn't soft. It was clean steel. He could tease Johnny without nicking him, roast a senator without sounding bitter, and kid about fame without pretending he didn't enjoy it. That balance, sharp but warm, fit Carson's sensibility. He wanted laughter that traveled well, that families could share without anyone reaching for the remote. Backstage, Hope remembered names. He'd shake hands with the prop guy, wave at the boom op, and deliver a quick joke for the stage manager that felt like a tip. Johnny noticed. That old-school courtesy was a value he rarely said out loud but always measured. When the segment ended, there was no sentimentality, just the mutual nod of two craftsmen who had landed the plane. As the band played out, Johnny would glance at Hope with quiet admiration, the kind you only give to someone who still loves the work as much as you do. With Bob Hope, The Tonight Show felt exactly like what Johnny wanted it to be. A smart, generous prize fight where the only thing that got hit was the laugh line. Jack Benny didn't need to take the stage. He drifted onto it. No rush, no flourish, just a slow, deliberate presence that told the room to breathe with him. Carson sat a little straighter when Benny appeared. The jokes would come, yes, but first there would be the wait. And with Benny, the wait was the point. He used silence like an instrument. A glance to the audience, a tiny turn of the head, a raised eyebrow that said everything and nothing at once. Johnny loved that control. He was a craftsman of timing himself. But Benny's timing moved like a clock you couldn't hear, only feel. A line that in lesser hands would be ordinary became unforgettable, because Benny stretched it until the laugh had no choice but to arrive. On the couch, Johnny would pitch him an easy setup and then stillness. Benny wouldn't rush. He let the audience lean forward, let the band settle, let the cameras seem to hold their breath. When he finally answered, the release was bigger than the punchline. Carson watched those mechanics like a student sitting in the back of a master class. He wasn't trying to add to the joke. He was studying the space around it. Backstage, Benny's precision kept going. He'd ask a stagehand to lower the stool an inch, not for comfort, but for rhythm. He'd read the monologue card and quietly suggest cutting a word so the beat would land cleaner. He didn't talk about timing as a theory. He adjusted the room until timing became inevitable. Johnny respected that deeply. Plenty of stars were funny. Very few built an environment where comedy had to happen. Benny's persona, patient, polite, a little vain, a little stingy, worked like a scaffolding. He could hang any joke on it because the audience already knew the music he was playing. When he paused, people filled the gap with what they expected him to think. That partnership between a performer and a crowd fascinated Johnny. It was trust, earned over years, expressed in a single heartbeat of quiet. During commercial breaks, he didn't perform for attention. He conserved it. A nod to the camera operator, a small grin for the makeup artist, a gentle, "How's your night?" to the stage manager. He left energy in the tank so the next silence would carry weight. Johnny admitted, at least to friends, that whenever he slowed his monologue or let a laugh breathe, he was tipping his hat to Benny, not copying, honoring. Because Jack Benny showed him something simple and rare. If you respect the audience, you give them time. And if you master that time, you own the laugh without ever raising your voice. When Ella Fitzgerald sang on The Tonight Show, the room changed temperature. The band tightened, the audience leaned in, and Johnny's posture shifted from host to listener. He didn't interrupt. He didn't riff. He watched. Ella didn't come to dazzle with tricks. She came to tell the truth in perfect pitch. Her entrances were modest. No grand flourish, no wink at the camera. A nod to the band, a quick smile at Johnny, and then that first phrase, round and effortless, like it had been waiting in the air for her to arrive. Carson loved precision, and Ella's precision wasn't mechanical. It was human. Every note carried a story. Every breath felt intentional. When she slipped into a scat run, the band answered like old friends finishing each other's sentences. Johnny lived for that kind of craft. Nothing wasted, everything earned. Backstage, the myth shrank and the person grew. Ella thanked the monitor engineer for keeping the mix clean. She complimented the makeup artist's light touch. She asked the stagehand how the week was going and meant it. No entourage blocking hallways, no orders barked across the floor. If a young intern edged close with a program to sign, Ella would hold the pen with both hands as if the moment belonged to them, not her. Johnny noticed all of it. In a business shaped by ego, she made humility look like a superpower. On the couch, she spoke softly, about the road, about musicians who taught her to listen before she sang, about audiences who didn't need fireworks to feel wonder. Johnny rarely pressed. He didn't have to. The music had already said everything. When the applause finally ebbed, he'd exhale, almost relieved, as if the show had just been reminded what live television could be when it wasn't trying too hard. What placed Ella on Johnny's private list wasn't only talent. It was the way her talent respected the room. She never bulldozed the band or chased applause. She built a space where the audience could come closer, and in that space, Johnny felt safe. No competitiveness, no need to out-clever the moment. Just two professionals quietly honoring the same craft. When she left the stage, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of warmth, of grace, of the feeling that something honest had happened and didn't require explanation. Johnny would straighten his cards, glance at the camera, and smile with the kind of calm you can't fake. With Ella Fitzgerald, the show felt less like television and more like music, structured, generous, and true. Dean Martin didn't walk onto the Tonight Show set. He sauntered, loose tie, cocktail in hand, and a grin that promised trouble. Johnny knew what that grin meant. The plan was about to fly out the window, and he loved it. Dean wasn't polished like Benny or careful like Ella. He thrived in the mess. He'd slouch in the chair, interrupt Johnny mid-sentence with a half-sung line, or tease Ed McMahon until the audience doubled over. Carson, who usually guarded his format, would suddenly relax. With Dean, the show didn't feel scripted. It felt like two friends swapping stories in a bar that just happened to have millions of people watching. What Johnny admired was Dean's ability to turn chaos into charm. A guest who rambled might bore the crowd. Dean's rambling became the act. He'd stumble over a punchline, pause, smirk, and somehow land the joke even harder. The secret was confidence. Dean didn't mind looking foolish, because he knew his magnetism carried the room, and that looseness pulled Johnny along with him. Their banter wasn't about rehearsed lines. It was jazz, unpredictable, risky, and alive. Backstage, Dean kept the same energy. He'd wink at the camera crew, slip the band leader a compliment, or toast the floor manager with an imaginary glass. Johnny respected that spirit. It wasn't arrogance. It was generosity wrapped in mischief. For Carson, Dean Martin wasn't just a singer or comedian. He was a reminder that television didn't have to be perfect. It had to be fun. Every time Dean left the stage, Johnny leaned back with the satisfied grin of a man who'd just been reminded not to take himself too seriously. Jimmy Stewart didn't need a flashy entrance. He'd walk out slow, shoulders slightly stooped, that familiar drawl already softening the edges of the room. For Johnny Carson, who prized composure and quick wit, Stewart brought something rarer: sincerity. It wasn't just that he was a movie star. It was that he was genuine, unpolished, and deeply human in a world built on polish. Johnny adored the way Stewart told stories. He didn't rush. He'd start with a hesitant "well" and let the audience lean in. Whether it was about a small-town neighbor or an army memory, the tale always landed with heart. Johnny, usually sharp and ready with a quip, often found himself silent, letting Stewart's voice carry the moment. That wasn't his normal rhythm, but with Jimmy, it felt right. The night Stewart read his poem about his dog Bo is one of the rare times Carson's guard cracked. His eyes welled, his voice caught, and for once the host known for control showed vulnerability. Later, Johnny admitted Stewart was the most genuine man ever to sit in that chair. It wasn't just respect, it was admiration. Backstage, Stewart was no different. He greeted crew with the same warmth he gave the audience. He asked after their families, remembered names, and carried himself with the humility of someone who hadn't forgotten his roots. Johnny valued that deeply. He measured people not just by their talent, but by how they treated those who didn't have the spotlight. Stewart passed that test effortlessly. What Carson loved most was that Stewart embodied a kind of America that felt steady and true. In his presence, Johnny wasn't the host battling for ratings. He was a boy from Nebraska, reminded of why decency mattered. Stewart didn't just charm the crowd, he grounded the show. And for Carson, that grounding was priceless. George Burns didn't chase the spotlight. He brought it with him, the way a man carries a well-worn coat. Cigar in hand, glasses low, that glint in his eye said he'd seen every punchline twice and still liked the third one best. When he eased onto Johnny's stage, the energy didn't spike. It settled. The room trusted him before he spoke. Johnny did too. Burns practiced a kind of comedy that felt like manners. He didn't hurry a line, didn't squeeze a laugh. He placed jokes the way a careful host sets out crystal, with a pause, a smile, and an invitation to enjoy. He'd take a draw from the cigar, glance toward the audience as if sharing a secret, then drop a line so neat you could hear the joke click into place. Johnny loved that elegance. Plenty of comics were funny. Burns made funny feel civilized. Backstage, the myth matched the man. He arrived early, greeted the security guard by name, and shook hands with the prop master as if they were partners. He'd tap a stagehand on the shoulder, whisper a quick one-liner like a tip, and keep moving with a nod. That small courtesy traveled. By the time he hit the chair, the whole crew stood a little taller. Johnny noticed. He always measured a guest by how the room felt when they left it. Burns left it warmer. On the couch, Burns treated conversation like a waltz. Johnny would offer a gentle lead, a question about the road, the old circuits, the shift from radio to TV, and Burns would glide, telling stories that landed without strain. He never competed with the host. He collaborated. If Johnny wanted a laugh, Burns supplied the hinge, the turn, the clean exit. If Johnny wanted heart, Burns lowered his voice and let memory carry the moment, especially when he spoke about the people who built him. He didn't traffic in legend, he honored it. Carson admired the architecture of Burns's act. There was the setup you saw and the setup you didn't. A rhythm of microbeats, look, breath, tilt, line, afterthought tag that taught the audience how to laugh on cue without feeling coached. It was old-school craft, invisible and sturdy, that made television feel like vaudeville with better lighting. Johnny, who valued control, saw in Burns the blueprint for authority without noise. When the segment wrapped, applause felt less like release and more like gratitude. Burns would tap ash, smile at the crew, and stroll off slow, as if he were leaving a living room, not a studio. Johnny would gather his cards, calmer than before, reminded that the best comedy doesn't shout, it shakes your hand. With George Burns, The Tonight Show didn't just get laughs, it got class. When Sammy Davis Jr. arrived at The Tonight Show, it felt less like a guest walking on stage and more like electricity hitting the building. Johnny's smile widened before Sammy even sat down, because he knew what was coming. Energy, rhythm, and a kind of joy that couldn't be contained by cameras or curtains. Sammy had the rare ability to bridge the gap between performance and friendship. He'd hug the stagehands, throw a playful jab at the band, and spin a quick joke with the makeup artist before stepping under the lights. By the time he reached Johnny's desk, the whole crew was buzzing. Carson once said Sammy could light up Burbank without a plug, and it wasn't just a line. It was truth. On air, Sammy never sat still. He danced in his chair, tapped rhythms on the armrest, or slipped into impressions so seamless they left the audience gasping. He could move from Sinatra crooning to Bogart growling to Jerry Lewis mugging, all within 30 seconds, and Johnny would sit back grinning like a fan. Unlike some guests who needed the host's lead, Sammy carried the room on his own and invited Johnny to ride the wave with him. But behind the sparkle was respect. Sammy never treated the show like a platform to show off. He treated it like a party, and everyone, audience, crew, and Johnny himself, was a guest of honor. He listened, he responded, and he made space for others to shine. That generosity is what Carson valued most. He admired performers who lifted the whole room, not just themselves. Backstage, Sammy left trails of laughter. He'd teach a stagehand a dance step, joke with interns about their ties, or balance a hat on his nose just to break the tension before a tough taping. Johnny noticed how the crew lit up in his presence. That mattered more to him than ratings or applause counts. For Carson, Sammy Davis Jr. embodied what entertainment should feel like: alive, spontaneous, and kind. Every time Sammy left the stage, Johnny didn't just have a show, he had a memory. And in those moments, The Tonight Show wasn't a program. It was a celebration. Betty White didn't ask for room. She earned it the second she smiled. When she walked onto Johnny's stage, the audience leaned forward like they were in on a secret. Johnny, who respected quick minds and clean timing, sat up straighter. He knew what Betty brought: sharp wit, fearless play, and a warmth that never felt forced. From the first exchange, she matched him beat for beat. Johnny would toss a sly setup and Betty would catch it clean, flip it, and send it back with a line that drew a longer laugh than anyone expected. The brilliance wasn't just the punchline, it was the confidence behind it. She didn't try to outpace Johnny. She met him where he lived, dry, nimble, and a little dangerous, and then nudged him one step further. Watching them together felt like seeing two experts trade solos without stepping on each other's notes. Betty's humor had bite, but never drew blood. She could tease Johnny's ego, prod at late night's boys' club, or turn a harmless anecdote into a stealthy joke about power, and do it with a smile that made everyone feel included. Johnny admired that control. Plenty of guests swung hard and missed. Betty tapped the ball, placed it exactly where it needed to go, and strolled to first like it was nothing. It was poise disguised as ease. Off camera, she was the person Johnny quietly championed. When the segment ended, Betty didn't sprint for the exit. She stayed. She asked the stage manager how the day was going, thanked the camera operators for the close-ups, and chatted with the interns like they were old friends. If a makeup artist apologized for fussing, Betty would joke that the mirror was the real diva. That kindness wasn't performance, it was habit. Johnny valued it more than applause numbers. The crew loved her because she noticed people. She remembered names. She remembered pets. When a sound tech mentioned a sick dog, she circled back the next visit to ask how it was doing. That kind of memory made the room feel seen, and Johnny, who measured character by how someone treated the unseen, never forgot it. On air, she gave him freedom. Johnny could risk a weirder tag or a bolder aside because he trusted Betty would catch it. That trust is rare in television, rarer still when it feels this light. When the band played out and the applause finally settled, Johnny's grin said everything. If he could, he'd book her every week. With Betty White, the show wasn't just funny, it felt good. And for Johnny Carson, that was the highest mark a guest could hit. Strip away the applause signs, the cue cards, and the commercial breaks, and Johnny Carson's private list makes perfect sense. He didn't love fame, he loved craft. Lucille Ball showed him that chaos, when driven by heart, becomes pure joy. Bob Hope reminded him that tight writing and clean counters can feel like a friendly prize fight. Jack Benny proved that silence, when respected, can be louder than any punchline, teaching Johnny to let a laugh breathe until the room leaned in together. Ella Fitzgerald brought humility to virtuosity, turning the stage into a place of listening rather than showing off. Dean Martin loosened the screws, proving that comfort and charm can steer a segment better than any pre-interview. Jimmy Stewart gave Johnny permission to feel on air and to let sincerity trump the game. George Burns wrapped professionalism in old-world courtesy, making comedy feel like good manners. Sammy Davis Jr. electrified the room while lifting every person in it. And Betty White balanced bite with grace, matching Johnny line for line while making the crew feel like family. Taken together, these 9 gave Carson something he rarely said out loud: reassurance. That the job wasn't only to be clever, but to host a room where kindness, timing, and generosity win the night. When the band played out and Studio One exhaled, Johnny wasn't counting jokes. He was tallying moments that felt true. In those quiet beats after a great segment, he'd straighten his cards, glance at the audience, and know the show had honored what television does best: share a feeling you can't fake. If you grew up with The Tonight Show, you can probably feel those moments right now. So here's your turn. Which guest on this list would you have booked every week? And what's the single clip you'd show someone who has never seen them with Carson? Drop your pick and a timestamp in the comments. If this walk through late night's golden age hit home, tap like, subscribe for more deep dive storytelling, and ring the bell so you never miss what's next. Want a part 2? Tell us who Johnny should have added, and we'll dig in.